Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, making some T-handled hex wrenches. As with many of my builds, you might wonder why bother to make a tool that you can go out to Walmart and buy pretty cheaply. Well, in this case, it's being made for what I guess you might call a set of heirloom tools for my son. He just turned 21 this year, and it's a big milestone, so I decided to make him a set of tools and a toolbox to put them in. Hex wrenches, also known as hex drivers, Allen wrenches, Allen keys, they're tools that fit into hexagonal holes in screws to turn those screws. But of course, you knew that already. You also knew probably that fumbling around with all the little angle type keys is a big pain in the neck. So today's video is about making the ultra useful T-handle type, which are harder to lose and easier to operate. I'll be making 6 different hex drivers today, which I'll show pretty much interchangeably because they're all pretty much made the same, other than the width of the business end of the tool. I should mention, if you've been following along with the Jake's Toolbox project, this is the final tool in that project. Anyway, I'll begin by cutting a length of steel about 8 or 9 inches long. This is 1/4 inch round stock of a hardenable steel known as 01. If you want to duplicate this project, it's important to use a hardenable steel. Mild steel, the type sold as welding rod, rebar, and that sort of thing, is not hardenable. So if you make a tool out of that, your tool will strip out and fail in just about 10 minutes. 01 is often sold under the name of oil hardening steel and can be found in innumerable sizes at places like McMaster Carr, Granger, and so on. I'll begin by cutting the actual hexagonal driver noses or heads or whatever you want to call them. I'll insert the tool into a 5C collet. This fits into a hex collet block that can be rotated in a vise. If you want to do this yourself, the job can be done by filing it carefully by hand. That'll work just fine as long as you're careful. But using a collet block and a mill makes this process a lot easier to accomplish. I'll insert the block into my vise. I'm using a stop block on the vise so that each time I set it in the vise, it'll be in the exact correct position. If you watch the video I did about making Phillips head screwdrivers a few months back, it's the exact same idea here. I've measured everything carefully so that each hex driver will yield a particular dimension of tool. Now I'll just mill the first flat. Pop it out, slap it against the stop, retighten, mill the next flat, rinse and repeat until all 6 flats are milled. Now we'll use the old hand drill and belt grinder technique to put a taper into the shank. Then I'll repeat with the other tools. I just chose the 6 sizes that I personally use the most. There really wasn't any more thought put into the sizes than that. Obviously there are tons of different sizes. You could do them imperial or metric or whatever. It's just according to what you think you're going to use the most. Next, I'll bend it to shape on a little jig that I made specifically for this job. I won't show the making of the jig in the video here, but it's fairly simple to make. Just drill some 1/4 inch holes in a steel plate, then drop a few pieces of steel bar into the holes. Same 1/4 inch steel round stock that we're using for the hex wrenches. You can heat them with a torch, a forge, anything else that'll get them hot enough to turn the steel orange. The key point about the jig, as far as this project goes, is that the pins can be slid in and out of the holes. This allows me to make two close bends without getting the stock all tangled up in these pins, which would be kind of a pain in the neck. So on the first heat, I'll do the initial bend without one of those pins. Then on the second heat, I'll slide that additional pin back into its hole, then whack the stock on around into a T shape. So now we have a T-handle for the tool. These pins are hardened, by the way, so you can whack on them a little without bending them. Not the end of the world if you don't harden them that way, but it'll be more durable. Next, we'll harden the tips of the tools. Now, as a knife maker, I'm hardening tools every day, but if that's not something you're familiar with, let me show you how it works. There are a ton of different ways to do this, but the basic point is pretty simple. We're taking a soft form of steel and we're making it hard. As I alluded earlier, all steels cannot do this. 01 is probably the ideal steel for beginners and non-specialists because it's pretty easy to heat treat. Some hardenable steels are much more complicated. But in this case, the first thing you want to do is heat it up to about 1500 degrees. In an indoor environment, that's a cherry red color. Again, you could use a torch, you could use a forge, any heat source that'll get you up that hot will be fine. You can even do it in a backyard barbecue. In order to gauge the temperature, you can touch a magnet to it, and if it's still attracted, you need to get it hotter. The magnetism will go away in steel at about 1425 degrees Fahrenheit. So once it goes non-magnetic, you just want to go a little bit higher than that and you should be good to go. Okay, so when the steel's hot enough, I'll just plunge it into oil. We don't need to heat treat the entire tool, just the tip and a decent section of the shank. I'm using an industrial heat treating oil here, but it'll work just fine in peanut oil. The tool is now hard. Too hard, in fact, which makes it brittle like glass. So the next step is what's known as tempering. In this case, I'm tempering it in a professional heat treating oven, but you can just heat your kitchen oven to 475 and put it in there for about an hour. This will soften the steel, making it more resilient. If you're following along and making this for purely functional purposes, you can quit right here. Plenty of commercial hex tools are made this way, nothing but a steel loop for a handle. But I'm going to add wooden grips. Partly this is to make them more comfortable to use, and partly it's just to make them look cool. After all, this is for an heirloom project. So I'm going to be using a bunch of different woods, including zebra wood, an old piece of flame wood, some curly maple, among others. Now, if you want to do this yourself, you could use a router, or you can make a three-piece sandwich using a bandsaw or even a hand-operated jigsaw to cut out a matching cavity for the steel. The main point here is that we're just hacking out a little space for that T-handle to go. Now I'm going to be dragooning my CNC into service just for fun. This is totally gilding the lily, but that's the whole idea with the Jake's Toolbox project anyway. The idea here is to make two pieces, one with a pocket milled into it, and the other just a flat piece. So here goes on the CNC machine. Now look, I understand most people don't have the luxury of doing it this way, but like I said, you can easily make three pieces, cut out the middle pocket on a bandsaw or even a coping saw, and then glue them right together. It'll work out just fine. Here we are with two pieces. Again, because this is an heirloom project, I'll add my son's name to the handles using my CNC machine. Now I'll glue them together. Normally I'd glue with wood glue, but in this case I want to prevent the tool from flopping around in there, so I'll fill the cavity with epoxy. Next, I'll trim and sand them. You could do this all with hand tools, but in this case, I'll use my bandsaw and my belt grinder. Finally, finish. I took a couple of different approaches. In the case of the flame wood and oily exotic wood, I just buffed it up with some furniture wax. Then I put polyurethane finish on the walnut. Honestly, didn't like how that came out at all. So here's the set nested away in the toolbox I made for my son. I meant to get a better shot of the full set, but for probably the first time in 10 years of doing these videos, I forgot to get the money shot of the finished project. But you get the idea here. So if you're interested in seeing the full set of tools, check out the link to the playlist for the entire Jake's Toolbox series, which will include screwdrivers, a forged ball peen hammer, a Damascus steel X-Acto knife. That's kind of a crazy one. A whole bunch of cool tools. And so check the links in the cards and description for the playlist, which will include over time all of those videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years. So I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.